Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome to another episode of the Indigo Womb Wisdom Podcast. I'm your host and sister friend, Shatia Owsley, and thank you for watching and or listening. So sit back, grab some tea and a notebook, and let's vibe together as we have organic and practical conversations embracing intuitive womb wisdom, spirituality, and a sprinkle of magic to rebel, restore, and radiate overall wellness in our lives.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Indigo Womb Podcast. I am your host and your sister friend, Shatia Owsley, and today I would like to introduce our guest, Miss Kristin Rome. From private and public legal practice to nonprofit leadership and academia, Kristin Rome is dedicated to expanding possibilities for Louisiana families. For the entirety of her career, the New Orleans native, defense attorney, and doula has continuously taken concrete steps towards that goal, working with Louisiana families navigating interwoven systems that from conception define young people's life outcomes. With the research and experience-backed analysis that community safety starts with care that reflects parents' humanity. Kristin currently serves as executive director of the Louisiana Center for Children's Rights, a youth-serving nonprofit that fights to keep children out of jail through direct representation and policy work. She envisions a future beyond criminalization where those in perceived positions of power meet acts of socioeconomic desperation and trauma responses with compassion and comprehensive solutions that address root causes in order to maximize wellness for all.
Yeah.
I continue to learn new things about you. So welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to get to have this conversation.
I'm so excited. I know I read your bio. How did it all begin?
I guess the best answer to me feels like saying that I was raised by servants. I was raised by a criminal defense attorney, and what to me always felt like a community attorney. So if there were people in the family who needed an attorney, or people at the church that need an attorney, or just people in community, or grandma, oh, my son got arrested, that's what my dad was providing. My mom, who for most of my life was a hospice nurse, and so serving people at this very important point of transition. And when she wasn't a hospice nurse, she was a nurse that worked inside of detox or rehab facilities. And what I realized about my parents and what they chose to do in life, and this applies to my grandparents as well, is that they chose, but particularly my parents chose to go into professions that were actually things that they needed for their family and their community. And so like figuring out ways to allow their professions to serve the greater need of their families and their communities. I think for me, it started there. It started with seeing parents who engaged in work every single day. That wasn't just about making money, but it really was about how do we reshape our communities and how do we show up for our families in particular, because there were people in my family who suffered with substance use. And so my mom, being a nurse in these spaces, contributed to being able to help my family members. My mom is also a caregiver in our family. So when someone was sick or ill, they would live in our homes. I'm born and raised in New Orleans, and for as long as I can remember, New Orleans has been the incarceration capital of the world. I think now we teeter somewhere between 1 and 2 with El Salvador. And that being true, and recognizing that incarceration impacts mostly Black and brown people in the Deep South, in New Orleans, you can't be Black and not be impacted by incarceration. And so again, here was my dad showing up not only for community, but for my family, for my cousins and uncles and all the people in our family who were navigating the criminal legal system. So I thought a long answer is I think it started with just seeing my parents and how they showed up as servants to their family and their community, but then translated that into a profession.
What made you to decide to go into youth justice?
I think it goes again to what I saw and what the need
Mhm,
was in my community.
mhm,
So when I finished law school, I knew that I wanted to go into some type of defense work, but
mhm.
wasn't quite exactly sure where it would lead me. And so I started out of law school a practice with my dad and my brother-in-law, and we were doing criminal defense trial work. And I pretty quickly started to feel like trial work, though it was enjoyable, though it was meaningful, that there was more that I could do to get us closer to abolition. And as I thought about that, I wanted to get people out of prison. So I started visiting Angola Prison, which is the largest state penitentiary in Louisiana. It is the size of, or maybe a little larger than Manhattan, New York. And yeah, and at the time, I don't know the numbers exactly now, but at the time there was somewhere around 6,000 people in prison there in Angola, and a large majority of them were serving death in prison sentence, which means that you die in prison, life without parole is life without parole in Louisiana. And so I was visiting Angola prison and I met a man named Sean Williams. And Sean had been in prison serving a life without parole or death in prison sentence since he was a child, since he was under the age of 18 for something that happened when he was under the age of 18. And at the time, I was fresh out of law school. I had been out of law school about a year. I didn't even know this existed. Nobody talked to me about it in law school. And prior to law school, I'd just been deeply involved with I did street law, which is where you teach in high schools. I was a tutor with Urban League College Track. I really enjoyed working with teenagers. So I get there, I meet Sean. He tells me about this idea of a juvenile lifer and that there was this new Supreme Court case that could help all of the juvenile lifers get out of prison. And through Sean, I started representing him and working to get him resentenced. After that was in 2012, in 2019, I was released from prison and now works with me at my organization. In between 2012 and 2019, that was my exposure through Sean to youth justice work. And for me, the draw to youth justice work was it was a different way. Youth justice provided a way for me to explore my creativity in my legal work because in youth justice, and this should be the case across the board, but there's a lot of space to contextualize your client's life and tell their story. And so it provided for me an opportunity for me to do storytelling, which was something I had really been excited about and involved in in high school. I went to a creative arts high school for 1 year. I was a writer. So youth justice for me opened up this different approach to criminal defense and then really helped me begin to understand that if I wanted to abolish prisons, if I thought as a society we needed to be moving towards abolishing prisons, we were never going to do that if we still are allowing our society to incarcerate our children. And so it to me is kind of like attempting to drain a tub without turning off the faucet. And so as we recognize that the youth justice system is what perpetuates the over incarceration in the adult system, it really just completely blew my mind and opened my, I guess, sense of responsibility around really protecting children in particular as it relates to incarceration.
So where does it start, Kristen? And I say that because you are a holistic doula. There is an intersectionality between the two of reproductive justice work as well as youth justice work. How can people understand the intersectionality between those two?
Yeah. So a thing in birth is that, what I say to moms, I had a home birth, but what I say to moms is that the goal in birthing your baby is to birth without fear. And so if that is, if birthing at home is scary to you and you feel safer in a hospital setting, well, let's figure out how to make sure you can birth in a hospital setting. Because ultimately, what we want moms to understand is this is one of the most significant transitions you'll have in life. You're literally as close as you'll ever be to your God self as you allow life to come into the world. And so when we talk about reproductive justice, we talk about acknowledging that, supporting that a woman is closest to her God self, and helping her understand her autonomy in all of that. And so as I think about that as the foundation of my reproductive justice work, then I think, what does it mean to say that a woman has autonomy to birth her child and is closest to her God self in that transition, and we want to support her and uplift her and acknowledge her there. But then at some point, she no longer has a say in what happens to her child. And so I think about the youth justice system and how we arrest and incarcerate children for things they've been accused of, sometimes things they didn't do at all, sometimes things that they did do. But we're not including their mothers in recognizing or trying to figure out, how do we correct this? How do we hold this child accountable? How do we make this child see that their actions have harmed community? How do we support healthier communities? And so taking the mother out of that process, to me, is completely counterintuitive to what we talk about when we advocate for reproductive justice. Does the mom become less important at some point, at some age? So for me, helping moms understand at the outset when they first becoming pregnant, to understand this is not only your baby, this is our baby. This is the community's baby. We support you because, wow, look at what you're doing. You bring it. What do you bring into our community? Thank you for blessing our community. We open our arms to you for the blessing that you give to our community. And that needs to continue throughout that mother's motherhood journey. So for me, it starts with helping a mother know in conception and birth, you are loved, you are part of our community, and your baby is part of our community. And we protect you at all costs, not just during your birthing process, but throughout your life and throughout your child's life. We protect you at all costs, and we stand in the gaps and fill in for whatever support you need, which is the true meaning of village. So yeah, I hope that helps draw the connection there.
Yeah, I think that it does. I think it's important for both young men and young women who are growing up to have a positive male figure in their life. How are we bridging that gap? If dad is not present, how are we continuously supporting mom and also having a positive male presence in the lives, especially of the young men that you're working with?
A tough question. That's the one that I mull over myself, because there is an aspect to this where it is, we just need men. We need the men to be in the same way in birth, that the man has a very specific role in holding space, in protection, in creating the space and the energy that exists throughout a child's life. And I am always, when working with families, making sure that they understand that the father as well feels supported and needed in the space, and that the mom recognizes, like, here is our role, here is how we expect dad to show up as well. I think moving past that and thinking about fathers who aren't in the home, because, my doula work, when I first started off doing doula work, I had a specific interest in supporting moms with incarcerated partners. And so several of my early clients had incarcerated partners for the very reason that you're talking about. And where I think I kind of am now is recognizing, helping all of us, not just women, but also men, recognize that James Baldwin had a quote that said, "The children are ours, every single one of them." And I'm a paraphrase, but he said something to the effect of, like, and I'm starting to question if someone doesn't agree with that, maybe they're like morally inept. Totally paraphrasing, but the important part of the whole quote is important, but the part that I'm focusing on is this idea and understanding that all of these children are ours. So men in community, women in community, aunties, uncles, everything in between, we should all in community be seeing every single child as our own child, and recognizing, of course, certainly there's a difference, unfortunately, in the way our societies are created between how one shows up for their sister's child or their brother's child versus the mama that lived 3 blocks away who you see every now and then. That is her child. That is your child. You may show up a little differently, but when we see a young person in need, we should never be saying, "But that's not my child," or seeking to throw them to the jails or call the police on them or whatever. But instead, how do we show up? How do we figure out, as you're saying, how to stand in those gaps? And sometimes we don't have answers. Sometimes there's not a man we can pull into the situation. But it could be, all right, we about to sit with mom and figure out, what are the needs here, mom? What do you need help with? Or we're going to sit with the young person and be like, hey, where are you struggling? What do you need help with? And then figure out in our communities how to fill gaps, because the reality is we can't not. Like, there's not an option there. When we recognize that these children are ours, every single one of them, then it becomes much less of an option to not show up. So, yeah.
What do you think has shifted over the years where from our parents and our parents' parents, there was more of a sense of community, right?
So I think this is an issue that has a bit of nuance from community to community. Or the reason for it has a bit of nuance from community to community. In New Orleans, Hurricane Katrina had a specific impact on how our community shifted. But all over the country, our communities have shifted significantly. And in Black communities in particular, across this country, we're seeing like especially in like our biggest, so-called biggest cities,
Mm-hmm.
we're seeing a huge influx of gentrification. And I'm part of a book club with two of my Spelman sisters, and we just read this book called Skin and Bones. And it has nothing to do with what we're talking about, though. There are one of the central themes is like mother-daughter relationships. But she uses a definition. She defines gentrification in a way. I just had my book club meeting yesterday, and we talked about how her definition of gentrification was one that feels so valuable and one so that we can use, and it really grounds it in that gentrification robs communities, particularly Black and brown communities, of multi-generational access. So traditionally in Black and brown people of color communities, we have homes. You can probably think of this, each one of us on the phone. There was somebody in your family who it was like, if somebody needed a place to stay, this was where they stayed. In my family, growing up, I done had cousins from Chicago that done lived in my house for years. We've had uncles. Every one of my uncles has lived at my house at some point. My aunts have, I think, all lived at our house at some point. My grandparents lived in our house at some point. And so whether it was a young person living in Chicago who needed additional support, and so their parents sent them to New Orleans to live with us, or it was an ailing elder, my family's home was where they could live. In my experience, every Black person has this. Well, now it's a couple things. Who can afford to buy a house? First. That's first. Who can afford to buy a house? And if you happen to be able to buy a house, the likelihood that you're able to buy a house in a community where people like you live, and so that there is a community, is almost like impossible. It's very, very rare. And so this idea of gentrification now creating, like you go into neighborhoods and these houses are chopped into 3 one-bedroom condos, or there are 2 two-bedrooms in ways that just don't allow us to create multi-generational communities and sustain multi-generational communities, I think is what has led to our communities just changing in a way where we don't know each other. In particular, in New Orleans, I'll tell you, and I've discussed this with some of our clients who are detained at the detention center. New Orleans has a 100% charter school situation. So as of last year, 20 years post Katrina, the school board opened its first public school in 20 years. And that public school is in jeopardy of being closed 1 year later. So every school in New Orleans, 100% is charter schools. What that means is that you may live in this neighborhood, but your child may go to school in a neighborhood that's 4 miles away. And so what also ends up happening is your child doesn't have centralized community through neighborhoods. And so that has also impacted people's ability to be in community with other adults that are around their children, but also children's ability to be in community with the people that they spend the most time with, the people that they go to school with. So I think gentrification, things like charter schools, particularly in New Orleans, have led to the breakdown of our communities. I think certainly incarceration impacts it, but I wonder if we spend so much time sometimes thinking about how incarceration has taken men out of the households and now women out of the households too. We think about that so much that we don't acknowledge and think about how has housing and the lack of affordable housing and gentrification impacted how we build sustainable communities that are village-like and will be like, now, Kristin, I seen you. I'm going to tell your mama what you did.
So, how, as a community, with what we're facing, especially for you in New Orleans, how are you in getting involved in remind our neighbors in our village, hey, we need to come together, we need to bridge these gaps? What is being put in place to help our youth?
Yeah, so the organization that I lead is called Louisiana Center for Children's Rights. We are a nonprofit law office that serves as the youth public defender for the city of New Orleans. So that means about 90% of the kids arrested in New Orleans are our clients. In addition to our direct representation work of young people, we do statewide policy and advocacy work. So there are two things we're trying to do to build more community for young people across the state and kind of, as you said, like help people realize their place in the village. One is we sit on the steering committee, founding member of a coalition called the Youth Justice Advocates. It's a multi-generational coalition of individuals, organizations, young people, community folks who just care about young people and don't want to see young people incarcerated. And through the Youth Justice Advocates Coalition, we are building a community of folks that are committed to transformative justice, who hold public officials accountable to our young people and what we need for them. Aside from that, we also launched a narrative change campaign at the around March of this year, and it's actually called It Takes a Village NOLA. And our big effort through that storytelling work and that narrative change work is we've been going through community, including in the detention center, and having story circles with young people, community folks, older folks, younger folks. We even did an elementary school of trying to begin to understand, where do people see themselves in the village? And then understand, for young people, what do you need from your village? How has your village showed up for you? How is your village not showing up for you? And then building and creating stories and activations around what we learn through the story circles. But a big part of it, the biggest part of it for me, it conversation started. Like, so much happens from just talking, just having a conversation. Like, this, what emerges from the fact that Kristin and Shatia at this moment are having a conversation. What is it that you and I are able to create together that nobody else could create? Just you and I. And that those kind of things happen through communication. There's an activist, I think she's from Detroit. She's based in Detroit, Grace Lee Boggs, who was like, all we have is conversation. Like, everything happens through conversation. So importantly, what are we doing? We talking about it. We at every point letting people know this young person who you looking at and you like throw them under the jail, whatever, like, they're a reflection of you. This is our child. This is not somebody else's child. Vic, I like references. Vic Mensa also just did a post about this on Instagram. You know who that is?
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay, so yeah, he has this thing where he picks off the orange tree and like whatever.
Yes.
And so he recently did one because apparently there's a video. I don't watch these videos. I think it's terrible to watch these videos, but apparently there's a viral video going around of some young people jumping a lady in Chicago. And so essentially he's in his video being like, I had the same reaction as all of you. I was like, what is going on? Somebody needs to whip their behinds, put them in jail, lock them up, something. He was like, and then I had to realize these are our kids and they are only a reflection of us. And so it is incumbent upon us, anything we see that is not pleasing to us, that we look back at ourselves and say, how can I put out something different? How can I project something that's beautiful onto our children so they can project it back? Or how do I receive what's beautiful from our young people so I can reflect it back to them? So yeah, I think the biggest thing that I'm trying to do, that my organization is trying to do, is just at every point having conversations about it and not shying away from it. Even when it is something like, this was terrible, this was hard to watch, this is something I don't feel good about. I am pissed. I'm mad that these children did this. I'm hurt that these children did this. Talk about it anyway and figure out, how can we create something different for our communities?
Earlier in my career, I have a background in social work. I worked with adjudicated youth through an environmental agency program. And so part of their release program was to work with this environmental agency where we took
Mm.
them out into Washington, D.C., and they learned about the Anacostia River. They learned about the Anacostia watershed. One of the things that I noticed really made a difference was listening to their story, having a conversation and giving them an opportunity to voice their thoughts and feelings, and most importantly, to help them to understand that there are people who care for them, who they can trust, and that, hey, we see you. I don't think people truly realize the impact that just sitting down and asking a person their story, actively listening and giving them your undivided attention and safe relationships and spaces, you can see in real time a shift happen and change within them. So I'm wondering, what have you seen in your community by having these conversations with them?
Yeah, this is such an important part of our work. Like, to just like briefly get us back to the birth work, this is what we talk about all the time as it relates to birthing women or pregnant women, how their providers don't connect with them, don't ask them their stories. If they got high blood pressure, they're not asking nothing to put the high blood pressure in context. They're not, they're rushing them through appointments and not listening to them. And so this is not, as much as people like to make it a hot take, listening to someone is not a hot take. It's just not. It's just, like that's standard humanity.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we don't like what. And so as it relates to young people, our organization, LCCR, as the Youth Public Defender, one of the tenets of our work is working on the expressed interest of the child. So unlike some youth-based agencies, we don't work on what is called best interest. I don't know what's best for you. Similar to birth, and we look at women, we say, you're the expert of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us what you need. We use that same approach with young people. You're the expert of your life. Nobody knows better what you need than you. So we listen to you to figure out what it is that you need. And what we see, and what the win there is as a public defender's office in the deep South, where incarceration is, ingrained in the minds of even Black people, strongly believe in incarceration. The reality of being a public defender is you lose a lot. And so what I have to always say, and what my dad actually taught me as a young lawyer, was whether or not you win in the courtroom, certainly you want to win in the courtroom, but whether or not you win in the courtroom is secondary to the what you build with your client. Because even if you lose in the courtroom, if you've built relationship and trust with your client such that they believe that you care about their well-being and you are willing to do everything to get them to wellness, then even if you lose, your client is still changed, transformed, because they have felt a power that they haven't been able to feel for most of their lives. And that's particularly true with young people. The young people that we serve, very oftentimes, we're some of the first people who have ever asked them, what are you feeling? What do you want? Especially as an adult, to say, I work for you. I'm going to do whatever it is you tell me to do. And so we got a team of people, a social worker, a youth advocate, an attorney, a reentry specialist, who all show up for the kid and say, what you want me to do? I'm here to serve you. And what I find that does for young people, one is it's a huge a huge, like, for lack of a better word, self-esteem booster. It helps them see themselves more and ground in themselves more to know, "Oh, I can say what I want." And normally with teenagers, anybody who knows teenagers, they know what they want. Not really, you know what I'm saying? They know what they want. They just oftentimes don't know how to do it. So I think that is one thing that it really does. It helps transform the way they think of and see themselves and their abilities to attract and have what it is that they need and they want. The other thing I think is just, as we see others, we see ourselves. And I think what's been really important and transformative to me in this work is, as I am with young people, giving them the full attention and presence that you're talking about, I'm learning how to build connections with humans. I'm learning how to be a good present human as much as I can be. And that in and of itself is transformative. It's how we begin to transform our communities. And one thing that I always say, something that I've heard from young people, and so I try to share it with adults as I'm speaking with them, is young people, this is no secret either. Young people want to be seen and acknowledged. And so even if you don't have time to have a 45-minute conversation with a young person, what they have reflected back to me is looking at them, acknowledging them, and speaking to them goes such a long way. So see, if you see a young person walking down the street, saying to them, "How you doing? You all right? What you need?" And then being prepared to show up with whatever it is that they need, whether it is a few dollars, whether it is, "I can't help you right now, but take my number down. I'll help you another time." But at the very least, acknowledging their presence. Far too often, young people walk past us and we don't acknowledge them. And so taking a moment to say to them, "Good morning, how you doing?" And I even do this thing where if they don't speak back to me, I be like, "I know you heard me say good morning." "Oh, I'm sorry. Good morning." But yeah, just to let them know you in community. I'm watching you because I'm worried that you'll do something wrong, but I'm looking at you. I'm watching you because you mine. In the same way that when my child that I birthed out of my body, I'm keeping my eye on her. I'm keeping my eye on you too. I'm here to protect and support you. And that's important, particularly to children.
I was listening to an audiobook not too long ago. So it's very interesting to hear you say, especially in this day and age, our children's attention span, I think everybody's attention span is pretty short.
Yeah.
Right. But it says, he said, your kids don't need a whole lot of time with you, but if you can commit 20 minutes a day, just giving them your undivided attention, whether you have a toddler, you have, an elementary school age, or you have a teenager. In these 20 minutes, I'm showing up for you and I'm here for you and I'm with you. And I felt that was so powerful because I think many times we feel like we just don't have the time. Just showing up for them and giving them that time can make such a huge impact in their life. And so I think that's something that we can all do. Teenagers know what they need, but they also know who's
Ooh.
genuine.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
so if they know that you're genuine, you will see a totally different
Yep.
side of them. There is such a deep connection that is formed when you put in the time and the effort to just be with them. And
Yeah.
so I think that's very important. I feel like you felt something there
Yeah,
with
I
the
always tell people I just spoke at a legal retreat last week and I was doing a presentation on client-centered youth defense, and one of the things that I always say in these presentations is I've worked with adults as well, and before I started working with young people I defended adults, and a difference that I see with young people is young people are able to tell BS from sugar real quick. It don't it I mean it is it's beautiful actually. And they don't hold their tongues around it either. Like they're very clear if you want some BS. It's instant. They have a ability, and maybe this is like because they are closer to birth in this like transition from spirit to physical body, that they have this ability to like perceive that I think is like you just can't hide from them. It's another reason why I really love youth justice, because if you do youth justice, if you do youth justice work similar to birth work too, it calls on you to do your personal work, because the young person you working with, just like the mama you working with, they see all them demons. They feel that energy. Whatever you got going on, they feel it, they know it, and they calling it out. And so if you pretending it don't exist, or you trying to cover it up with a crystal necklace or whatever it is you done put on to try to cover up whatever your aura is really showing, they see it. So again, you justice for me has been this like just called on me to do, similar to birth work, has called on me to do like intense personal work and being okay with the human that I'm showing up as and moving in integrity, because they gonna call it out.
Yeah, it's mirror work in community form. And I think if we approach relationships in general as a mirror, whether you want to admit it or not, there is always something that you can learn from the person that you're serving, that you're working with. Because, like you said, children are closer to the spirit world than us adults who have been
Yeah.
here for a while, right?
Yep.
And so you, in essence, not only are a doula in the birth space, but you are also a doula in the legal space too. Not only are you advocating, you're teaching them how to advocate for themselves. What are you looking to do in the future to continue to pour into our babies, to pour into the community, to bridge the gaps, and to help not only the youth that you are serving together as a community?
So this question to me feels like, when I hear questions, this is a great question. But my brain, when I hear questions like this, these questions to me almost sound like, how are you going to end racism? How are you going to end systemic
Yes.
oppression? Like, this is what it sounds like. But what I've been trying to do, instead of becoming overwhelmed by like, well, that's impossible. Like, how do we create more humanity in this world, particularly this country? How do we create more humanity? What I do to not be overwhelmed about that is I've been recently doing some work around biomimicry. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but essentially it is mimicking, and if anybody's listening to this and you're a biomimicry genius, I'm a
Don't
newbie.
come for her. Don't come for
Don't
her.
come for me.
Okay.
But it's basically like taking life's principles in biology and mimicking them.
Mm.
And it's most, the fields that use it the most right now are like architecture and design. And so essentially, like, if you were someone designing a coat to be cold, to be warm in the winter, you would literally try to mimic the coat of, say, a penguin. And so you'd be
Mm.
looking at how the coat is layered, and you would literally mimic that in the coat that you create. So what I've been doing is looking at and working with an organization that looks at biomimicry for social innovation. And so studying nature to figure out, what can we learn from nature's genius? Nature has sustained itself for the past however millions of years. And as we humans are of nature, we are a part of nature, not separate from it. How can we be creating social innovation by looking at life's principles? So that's just kind of a backstory, kind of like a primer. Or someone who mentions it is Adrienne Marie Brown in her book Emergent Strategy. And one of the things that she talks about is fractals, and that like you start small, small is all. And so, like, for example, if you look at something like, I think a fern, for example, from every little part, it's like just bigger iterations of this initial design. And so when I think about your question, for example, I try to ground myself in small is all. I cannot change how all human beings react or interact, rather, and relate with one another. I can, however, be very intentional and thoughtful about how I relate with other humans. And I can trust that as I get in right relationship with other beings on this planet, that energy will grow. It will get bigger and bigger and bigger. And so the thing that I try to do, and the way that I think we get to what you're talking about, is by recognizing small is all. What I can do is get right with myself. I can get right with my mama. I can get right with my partner. I can get right with this little girl getting on my nerves. I can get right with that little boy getting on my nerves. Like, and just being in right relationship, even when, and most importantly, when, as you talk about mirror work, most importantly, when the reflection is something you don't like. And
Mm.
so as you are in relationship with somebody, and this happens so often in all communities, especially right now, like the idea of cancel culture, or the idea that, like, you get into it with somebody, you have a disagreement with somebody, or somebody harms you, and you are just like, I'm done with you. I'm finished with you. Don't talk to me. And instead, certainly protect yourself and certainly heal from harm, but also recognizing that we need each other. We are all deeply connected with one another. And so if Shatia has harmed me, certainly I need to heal, but also I need to recognize what happened to you, Shatia, that you would do that to me, that you would harm me in that way. And how do we repair so that you can repair? Yeah, so I'm thinking a lot about our interconnectedness and how even small connections impact larger connections.
I love that. We are seeing more community building in a different way, right? We are becoming a bit more creative in how we build community and what that looks like. I think our reach is a bit greater as well because
Mhm.
we do have social media. I would like to ask for those who youth justice work may be new to them, how can one get involved in their community? What are some ways that they can start just little by little to make an impact in their community with the youth so that we can start to see a shift and a change?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, speak to young people, acknowledge them. That's the thing that I always say. When people say, "How can I get involved?" I say, just start with acknowledging young people. When you see them at the grocery store, walking down the street, in community, at the bus stop, speaking to young people, acknowledging them, making it clear to them that you see them and you're part of their community and you care about them. If you can do more, do even more. I had an experience recently where a little boy came up to me, a teenager. He was like, I think he told me he was 16. He asked me to get him something to eat. And we were near a Whole Foods. And I said, meet me at the Whole Foods. I'll get you something to eat. And he ended up needing to get a couple groceries and was just like overwhelmed with gratitude. He said to me, he was like, I wish more people did stuff like this. And so just taking time. I mean, it took me 30 minutes. It's fine. Like, you know what I'm saying? So starting there, showing up for them in whatever ways that you can. If it's just a smile, a smile. If it is taking them to get groceries, that is great as well. I think another thing is so many of us know about programs or things in our community where young people operate and we love them and we think, oh, this is a great program. You mentioned the program that you worked with in DC. Connecting with those programs, but then not just connecting with them and pouring into or donating to those programs, but then making sure and inquiring about how are these programs connecting with young people?
Mm.
Is there space for formerly incarcerated young people? Is there space for system impacted young people? But really being sure to recognize that any programs that we have that serve youth in our communities, whether it's a community center, whether it's a job training program, whether it's an arts program, that they're, because young people who have been incarcerated are the most vulnerable amongst us, they are the least likely to be able to access these programs. Whether it's because of an program is through school, for example, and our young people are opportunity youth and are connected with school, whether it's because the program requires parental involvement and the young people we serve don't have that available to them, or oftentimes it's a transportation issue. The young person can't get from home to point B for the program. But really understanding from programs, how do you connect with young people and how are you making sure that the most vulnerable young people have access to your program, I think is another way to get involved. If anyone's in Louisiana, being sure to follow my organization, Louisiana Center for Children's Rights. We're on all the socials as LA Kids with an S, Rights with an S, and our website is lakidsrights.org. So tapping in with us, getting our newsletter, coming to our events. And then also, if you're in Louisiana, joining the Youth Justice Advocates. That website is youthjusticeadvocates.org. And there's an Instagram as well.
Yes. I was going to ask you, how do we get in contact with you? But she
Alright,
already said I'll make sure that I put all that information in the description as well. And
okay.
so before we close out, I've learned so much through our conversation, not only about you, but also about the work that you're doing and your organization. And it really just makes you think about how much more one can do in their own community if they want to see a difference. And like you said, it doesn't take a whole lot right? Especially for those who may not have a whole lot, but still want to be in community and still want to make an impact and pour back into their community. I think the biggest thing that we discussed and talked about, which is extremely important that I don't think a lot of people put as much value as they could, is on these type of conversations. It's so you learn so much by really being attentive and letting them know this is a safe space for you to just be you. So I do appreciate you for that. Before we go, there's always one question that I ask our guests before we close out. And that question is, with all your lived experience and everything that you have been through, what would you tell little Kristin?
That's a good question. I would tell little Kristen that there's not a destination. And, I think as a child, as a young adult, I very much believed there was a destination. So helping young Kristen understand that life is the journey and to big Chris need to hear that too, but just like recognizing that life is emergent. And so as there's not a destination, everything is just emerging. It's just happening and just be present with it and allow it to emerge and find joy, solace, whatever you need, find it in the fact that it is happening. It is just happening. But yeah, I think just in a nutshell, it would be there is no destination. It took all of my 30s to get clear on, there's not a destination here.
We just gonna keep rolling.
Yeah, we rolling. And not that there's not a trajectory, not that
Right.
there's not a path, but there's not a destination. And wherever I find myself at any given point, not to get caught up in, wait, why am I here? I wasn't supposed to be here. Is this the end? Or, does this stop here? But to just be receptive to the journey and enjoy the journey and the path. But not to get caught on the destination.
Is there
Yeah.
any last words that you want to leave our guests with today?
I think just reminding people always that the children are ours, every single one of them. And whether they thrive or fail is directly connected to us. It's our responsibility. And as the future we intend to see is being built right now in the present, it is quite scary to me how quickly we are okay with throwing our children away, how okay we are with calling the police on our kids, of deciding to abuse our kids, deciding that it's okay to beat our child's behind, deciding it's okay to call the police on them, deciding it's okay for them to sit in a prison for a couple, even if it's a couple years, even if it's a couple days. It's scary to me that we're building a future with that. And so just, reminding people that I think in that vein that it is the definition of insanity is to keep doing the same thing and expect different results. And as Black people, it's no secret what incarceration has done to our communities for hundreds of years, starting with the enslavement of our ancestors. And so to continue to see this way of being, this way of responding to harm, this carceral response, to see how it so poorly impacts our communities, but to continue to believe in it. What? Because we're unimaginative? Because we're lazy and don't want to imagine? I don't believe that. I think, Ruha Benjamin in her book, I don't remember the name of the book now, but she has a book and it is about imagination and this understanding that we frame imagination as this beautiful, we imagine beautiful things, but we also have to recognize that ugly things were imagined too. Prisons are based on somebody's imagination. And so really beginning to be more imaginative of how we want our communities to look and shifting that, particularly as it relates to our children. So that was a lot of thoughts, not one thought, but that's all my thoughts as we close.
And we take all of it. Thank you
Yes.
so much for being with us today. I greatly appreciate you and your time. You have provided us with so much great information. And I hope that
Mhm.
people really take it to heart and it revives something in people to give them that boost or to help them understand that there is still so much that can be done. We will continue to love on you and support you. Please get involved if you are in New Orleans. And even if you're not, still follow her, Kristin, on Instagram, follow her organization. So thank you for doing the work, Chris. Thank you for fighting for our babies. And we want to be walking alongside of you to fight for our babies too. So thank you, everyone. You're so welcome. Thank you, everybody. And we will see you in the next episode. Peace.